Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, looters, shells, desolators, peasants, bastards, minions, meat sacks. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome. It's been a while. I'm having a hard time getting gassed up and getting going again. So I got the engine started, but I can't keep it running. I'm a little extra cynical these days. There's just so much crazy, insane stuff going on around the world. This is just a hobby for me. I try not to take it too personally, but it's pretty crazy out there right now. There's a lot going on in my personal life as well. So anyway, so this video could be a little extra acerbic, even compared to the usual, and particularly because I'm going to be talking about this event, this visit by Benjamin Netanyahu speaking in Congress, and everything I hate about politics and geopolitical manipulations and all this grandstanding and backstabbing and all this media manipulation. It's just sickening. This is a spectacle, a grand spectacle. And all my regulars know that all these big, huge political events like the State of the Union just really make my stomach churn. But as usual, I watch these things to report to my regulars, my subscribers, and my friends. And so anyway, let's get to it. First of all, we have this event happening at all, and I just find it a complete affront. And just in political terms, once again, like I say, personally, I could give a shit. This is all a bunch of bullshit anyway, and these players are out there playing their games, and I'm just an observer. And but to see the same kind of posturing that we always see, we have first of all this foreign leader using this spectacle, speaking in Congress, to reinforce his own election campaign, which is the election's coming up later this month, and so he's using this for political opportunism. We all know how I feel about that, and then we have John Boehner, who is also one of the queens, the grand queens of political posturing. And so he's snubbing Barack Obama and announcing the coming of the GOP Congress by doing this audacious move. And of course, he tries to play all nonchalant, but we know it's pretty much a spit in the eye and political gamemanship. And so Netanyahu and Boehner are both in on that together. And I found it interesting that Boehner said we need to have Benjamin Netanyahu come to hear the real information about what's really going on over there. Even though Netanyahu has been lying about the Iranians and their nuclear program for decades, and continues to manufacture non-evidence, just like he does for everything. So let's remember, he came here to warn about the nuclear weapons program of Iran being guaranteed because of this deal. And any deal is a bad deal. But let's remember, in 1992, he said that it was Iran was 3 to 5 years to a bomb. In 1995, he said that they were 5 to 7 years at most to the bomb. In 1996, he even spoke in Congress and warned that they were extremely close. Iran was extremely close. So that was even 20 years ago. In 2009, he said they were 1 to 2 years away. And in 2012, he said they were a few months away. So to continue to lie, but that's the beauty of politicians all over the globe. Somebody like this can lie for going on 30 years now, and there are no repercussions. And people are continually willing to believe him. So anyway, he comes in, and also let's remember that just previous to his arriving, the gamemanship was already beginning with all the media blitz, not the least of which was one report, the leaked Mossad report, that contradicts Netanyahu's depiction of Iran being having a nuclear weapons program, at least as far along as Netanyahu likes to portray it. So that was interesting. And then we also have theoretically some secret site that's been revealed by in our Iranian opposition group. But we see that all the time. We saw that in Iraq as well. These opposition groups that are used to perpetrate regime change in these countries, always coming up with this fake evidence, which we've seen time and time again, like I brought up. So anyway, let's go through this kind of quickly. First of all, he walks in and gave kind of a nice Hitler-like wave, and then John Boehner called him His Excellency. And then he spent the first part of it patronizing Barack Obama. And this is important to note because it's political gamemanship. He is trying to embarrass Obama for not being there and having this distaste for Netanyahu and Boehner arranging this meeting. And so in order to further embarrass Barack Obama, of course, he takes a conciliatory and a patronizing tone, which is rare for Netanyahu, so that's why it stands out as well. And he said that he never intended for this to be perceived as political, which of course is ridiculous. Everything he does and says is political, and he knows it. And then he talked about all the presidents that have supported Israel, from Harry Truman to Barack Obama. But that's historical revisionism, because if you go back to Harry Truman and Eisenhower and all the way up to LBJ, most U.S. presidents were wary and actually not very supportive of the state of Israel for its first 20 years, from 1948 to 1967. And in fact, it was France and Soviet Union who were the allies of Israel. And then he talked about taking on the Hamas terrorists, calling the destruction of Gaza, taking on the Hamas terrorists, and talking about being grateful for the Iron Dome, the Capitol Dome, created the Iron Dome, he said, and they invoked a bunch of ancient history, and that's something that's important, especially for the Zionist movement in general, is to evoke this ancient history, these Europeans claiming this lineage going back thousands of years in the Middle East. And then, of course, the usual nod to the Holocaust and tapping into the global guilt syndrome, and painted Iran as religious zealots when they took over in 1979. But one could argue that the religious zealots are in charge of Israel as well. And then he just went on his usual distorted narrative of Middle Eastern events and revisionist history. Every criticism he had of Iran that he leveled at Iran could equally be charged to numerous countries in the region. And in fact, he talked about a militant Islamic empire, and that he was talking about Iran, not Saudi Arabia, oddly enough. And he made continuing references to this global reach of Iranian terrorism, which would be hard to make a case for. Certainly there are Iranian support to a certain degree with weapons and money to different insurgent struggles, but everyone on the planet is doing that. And certainly Iran's efforts are minuscule compared to many, and not to mention the fact that Saudi Arabia is the one that is exporting Wahhabism and terrorism through the entire region around the globe through their efforts. And likewise, Netanyahu talks about the extreme combination of Islamic extremism and nuclear weapons that we have to worry about. But that situation already exists because we have Pakistan, which essentially is an Islamic extremist state with nuclear weapons. So one could make a case there. And this breakout time thing that he keeps talking about is a broken record, because once again, this breakout time that's going to take for them to assemble a nuclear weapon he's been talking about for 30 years. And he details the defiance and the hide and cheat efforts of Iran for their military program and all of their secret facilities, and that gets to the bottom of what the most amazing audacity of the speech and the underlying narrative is, and that's the fact that Iran has participated in the Non-Proliferation Treaty and has abided by the rules, and their entire country is crawling with inspectors at an unprecedented level, and certainly they could be deceptive, but Israel is the last country on earth that has the right to criticize that tactic, because they've been hiding their nuclear program, and to this day have barely admitted or have had to answer to the international community for a vast nuclear arsenal. And so the hypocrisy here, as usual, is staggering. But that's what you expect from a state, whether it's Israel or any other. So then he goes time and time again it's been proven that Iran cannot be trusted because of this hide and cheat program. So one could say the same with Israel. Israel cannot be trusted because they have been lying and cheating and hiding their nuclear program for decades. Iran would be able to launch its nuclear missiles around the world, but they do not have that capacity now. But that tries to make this threat like they're going to be the new Hitler and send nuclear missiles all around the world randomly. This from a country that has not invaded another country in a modern era, the modern era encompassing several hundred years. Israel, once again, talking about a Middle East arms race and a nuclear nightmare when they are already armed with anywhere between 80 to 200 to 300 to 400 nuclear bombs, depending on which source you use. And then, of course, Netanyahu lays down the ultimatum, which is completely nebulous and vague, but threatening, that we can solve these things if Iran just, one, stops aggression to its neighbors, two, stops supporting terrorism around the world, and three, stops threatening Israel. Well, first of all, there's a lot of threatening countries threatening each other in the world. And once again, we go back to these exaggerated threats. For example, the mistranslation from Ahmadinejad that continues to haunt the media, even though it's been debunked. The translation that they want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth is not the same as the reality of the translation as I understand it, which is they want the Zionist regime to be relegated to the pages of history. And there's a lot of people in the world besides terrorists who would like to see the Zionist regime. It's not necessarily Israel per se. A lot of people can accept to some degree the existence of Israel at this stage of the game, but the Zionist regime that continues its neocolonialism in that region of the world deserves to be criticized. And then we go, once again, stop aggression to its neighbors. Which neighbors in the Middle East are not fomenting aggression in their neighbors? Every single country in the Middle East is involved in each other's business, it would seem. So to single out Iran and their relatively modest efforts, of course, the main problem with Israel is the fact that Iran supports Hezbollah and Hamas, who are two groups labeled as terrorists, who, depending on who you ask, of course, for me, the truth is always in the middle. They could be freedom fighters, they could be terrorists. Who else is going to defend Lebanon if it's not Hezbollah? Who else is going to defend Palestine or Gaza than Hamas? And I also found it funny that Netanyahu got a standing ovation when he said, quote, "If Iran wants to be treated like a normal country, let it act like a normal country," unquote. And I say unto you, Netanyahu, the very same. If you want Israel to be treated like a normal country, you need to behave like a normal country. And then he said that the deal, we'd be better off without it. And then he got another standing ovation. And then once again, milked the Holocaust global guilt syndrome by parading out Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor. And so that is always a great, I don't know, kind of adds a kind of a shebang to the whole proceedings. And then he said, quote, "I wish I could promise you that the lessons of history have been learned," unquote. And once again, there's plenty of humility to go around in the world learning the lessons from history. And so anyway, let's get back to some of these other claims that he made. Netanyahu claimed that the Iranian regime that threatens to destroy Israel is devouring country after country in the Middle East, unquote. Once again, we see Iran with its proxy actors, its bad actors and its proxies protecting its interest in that region and taking opportunities where they can find them to say that they are devouring country after country is mischaracterization at best. And certainly there's other countries in the region that one could argue are more interested in that. Once again, I go back to Saudi Arabia and their export of Sunni Wahhabi terrorism. And Then, of course, he got a standing ovation when he said that Israel and the U.S. agree that Iran should not have nuclear weapons, unquote. But, of course, they disagree on how this should be done. And he made most of the same points at AIPAC, although the speech he made at AIPAC before he went to Congress, although essentially sometimes I think Congress and AIPAC are interchangeable, he dragged out this map and tried to show this global octopus that Iranian terrorism is supposed to be. And once again, I say it's an exaggeration to say that their efforts to support global terrorism, certainly they have nothing to do with ISIS, whom they are against. They don't have anything to do with Al-Qaeda, whom they are against. And Saudi Arabia has everything to do with both of those groups. So that's pretty much all the evidence we really need there. So what's going on here? I think we have the real purpose is to remove the last opposition to the Israeli, U.S., Saudi agenda. And it's hard to say where one country's agenda ends and where the other begins. We also know that these are uneasy allies. If you remove the common quotient of Iran, there becomes less and less to make Israel and United States and Saudi Arabia's interests line up. So right now it's convenient because we have Iran as this new boogeyman. We also have the danger that this could give Netanyahu a boost in the elections and he could be reelected and use this to mandate a war. Israel could easily start a war, and then the U.S. would have no choice. It could actually use it as a smokescreen and say, well, Israel is going at it, and we have to honor our obligation and join in. That seems to be a likely scenario, and it could be planned out behind the scenes to look that way. It doesn't necessarily have to be accidental, but I would guess at this point Netanyahu is crazy enough that he could do something like that. And if I have a friend who has what he calls a visceral distaste for Barack Obama, and I understand that feeling because I have a visceral distaste for Netanyahu, and I have a lot of reason to really despise Netanyahu personally because he actually believes the stuff he says. When you hear the likes of George W. Bush and Barack Obama, they're puppets. They have speech writers. They really have no principles. They are a machine. They are a puppet. But Netanyahu really does have an effect. He really does run Israel, and he has some very dangerous ideas, and he really believes that stuff. So there's a special reason why to make it personal with Netanyahu. I would add, too, that Colonel Wilkerson, who used to ex-military man who we see on all the shows now, he points out that Iran is the most stable. He argues that Iran is actually the most stable and democratic country in the region and is doing the most in the region to fight ISIS and stabilize Iraq. And I know that's a tough sell for many Americans, but reflects a lot of the realities. And also that this argument that if Iran gets the bomb, they're going to bomb Israel. It just, like I've seen in some analysis, it just doesn't make sense for a lot of reasons. For one reason, and I've done a video on this, there's mostly evidence to point to the fact that Iranians do not have a nuclear weapons program. They've only had passing interest in it, and they have a lot of religious reasons for not wanting to have a nuclear weapons. And of course, this could be a deception, could be a smokescreen, but I try to look at what all the evidence is and get to what would be a reality or a truth. As Ron Paul said, it's not so much that I'm pro-Russian as I'm pro-truth, and it's not so much that I'm pro-Iran, and it's not even so much I'm anti-Israel as I'm pro-truth. And like I say, the bottom line is that why don't we talk about Israel's nuclear program? Let's put that on the table, and it's really astounding to me that the world even has the audacity with a straight face and having a forum like the UN that the Israel cannot be called out. They can send Netanyahu to speak in Congress about challenging Iran before they even have a fully operational nuclear program capable of producing nuclear weapons. And then we have a country like Israel that remains unchallenged, undeclared, is not signed to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, does not have inspectors, and doesn't have to answer for it at all. And if we have an equal playing field of countries, they should have to answer for it. And then it's also interesting that we find out that a lot of American Jews are not very supportive of Netanyahu or his agenda or his characterization of Iran. In fact, a very large proportion don't consider themselves aligned with Israel, or are only slightly aligned, and that's near 60 to 70%, according to some information I've seen. And then another interesting story came out of Saudi editorial in Al Arabiya, and a notable Saudi has written a very critical article, editorial, very critical of Barack Obama, very, very supportive of Netanyahu and him speaking in Congress. And this is to be expected, because this is a wet dream for Saudi Arabia. This is where the confluence of Israel's interests and Saudi Arabia's interests comes in. And of course, they're going to be fully supportive of Netanyahu and his efforts to have Iran bombed. That is in absolutely the number one interest of Saudi Arabia. And so the editorial is really irrelevant. And last but not least, I would like to add that I find it interesting that Netanyahu in Europe called for all the Jews in Europe, since they're not safe in Europe because of the anti-Semitism. But of course, the anti-Semitism in Europe is due to Israeli policy, so it's more anti-Zionist, anti-Israeli, that it may manifest in what appears to be anti-Semitism, but it's actually due to Netanyahu's policies, and therefore that's an ironic cycle. But we also see that he calls for them to go to Israel because they're not safe in Europe, and yet at the same time he warns about how no Jews are safe in Israel as long as Hamas terrorists threaten them on a daily basis. But then also, is he inviting all the Jews of Europe to move to Israel only to be vaporized by Iranian nuclear bombs? Stay tuned. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.